Okay, I'm going to call the meeting to order. It's the first time I get to do this. I don't remember doing it last year, but I'm going to call the meeting to order because as of now, we do not have a chairman. And so the first thing we're going to need to do is to elect a chairman, and I can turn the meeting over to that person. So what we'll need to do, and Sherry, help me out here, make sure I say it, do it the right way. We'll need a nomination and a second. And then if we have anyone else, we'll have another nomination and a second until nominations are closed, and we'll have to vote to close and then vote for the chairman. Is that correct? So at this time, I'll open the floor or the board here, however you want to look at it, for nominations for chairman of the board.
Nominate Stephanie.
We had a nomination of Stephanie. Do I have a second?
Second.
All right, second. Do I have any other nominations? That'll make this a relatively easy vote, but we'll need a motion to close the nominations and a second and a vote.
Motion to close.
Second.
Motion by Mr. Bowers, second by Ms. Bard. All in favor? And so moved. So at this time, we now have one nominee, and so all in favor of Ms. Rager being Chairman Rager, say aye, please.
Aye.
And that leaves none opposed, so our chairman is Ms. Rager. Congratulations, second term. I'm going to expect better things this time.
Maybe my speaking skills will improve.
She will do that, yeah. So I will turn it over to Chairman Rager now, and she will take it from here to have a vice chairman.
Okay. At this time, we'll need to elect a vice chair. Are there any nominations? We have a nomination for Ms. Wells, second by Mr. Bowers, and just all in favor, I guess, of Susan Wells being the vice chair, say aye. Aye. All opposed? That's it. Vice chair. All right. Things haven't changed. Yeah, we'll just keep going. All right.
Next up again for another 2 years.
I know. All right, so at this time, we're gonna do our review of our fiscal year 18 audit, and we have our representative here to tell us all about our financial situation.
Good evening, my voice is a little deep tonight. I'm fighting a little head cold. So, and I think this is kind of different tonight, at least I talked with Eric, and hopefully this is going to be more of a, I guess, a presentation / working session, maybe. So a little more different from that standpoint. So, and I guess we have some new members too. So this would be kind of a eye-opening, like, wow, what is an audit? And try to ask questions, answers. I mean, again, very informal here, I try to be, from my standpoint. Let me take a step back. I'm Lanny White with Carl Reagan Ingram. We've been doing the work for a few years, and been through some times with the district, some of the better times and some of the worst times. And you're in some of the better times now, so it's always good to come to give a good report. It's always tougher to come to give some tough reports. So we'll kind of start through. I'll put in front of you, there's actually the document. You'll see the big 3-ring binder of all the papers in there. Then there should be like a graphs, but you'll kind of use some pictures in there. I like pictures. They can give a little more resemblance. Plus, the financials are only done always on a 1-year basis, so it's hard to get some trends from my standpoint, where the graphs are done on a 3-year basis, so you can kind of get some trends from my standpoint to give you the more feel from that for us. The consistency and stuff. So kind of together, we'll kind of bridge it to make it able to answer some of your questions from my standpoint. Well, the first thing is, before we get into the numbers, I just want to go through the letters, because the letters is really what we provide to the district. If you go to page 1, and inside your document, we actually give an opinion on the financial statements. And so they're your financial statements. We may assist the district in putting them together for them, but Eric and his crew will go through and look at them and review them and approve them once we get them compiled for them. You receive what's called an unmodified opinion, which means there's no material errors. So for any user, that's what you want on there, from a bondholder, KDE, any other regulatory grantor, etc., citizens in this district, from my standpoint, and board members too. So again, it's a clean opinion, that's what they call it, kind of from the financial standpoint. Now, there is on page Two, I just want to point out, because there's some things that's happening in the last really 4 or 5 years that's really impacted governmental entities, and which includes school boards. You'll see a thing there called emphasis of a matter in the middle of that page, page 2. There was a new standard passed this year, and it's called, again, you sit there, post-employment benefits other than pensions, and the slang is OPEB. And another slang for it is called health insurance. And what's happened is 5 years ago, the pension standards changed to where you all belong into 2 plans primarily, one for the teachers, KTRS, and then one for the classified folks, which is the county employee retirement system, provided by Kentucky Retirement Systems. And so the 2 systems there, on the teacher side, really, you aren't responsible for that plan. The state pays for all of that, from my standpoint. Now, inside the financials, we do book what's called on behalf payments, so whatever they pay for you, the expense revenue is in there, it washes out, nets out, but it shows what they pay for you. In lieu of you paying it, which is reflected in there, they pay it. Now, the county retirement system, you pay. And it's in a cost-sharing plan too, which means there's multiple employers in that plan. So everybody has like a little piece of the pie, if you were to slice it up, from my standpoint. And so that liability, because as you've heard for months and years now, how the state is underfunded in the pension liability, that's being pushed to every employer in the state on their financials, what that piece of the pie is for them. And so yours is also recorded in here, and we'll see here in a few minutes that number. It's a big number. And it's driven by the number of employees you have hired by the district. And so this year, similar to the pension, they put the health insurance piece, the OPEB piece, now came in place. So now you have, the OPEB is also underfunded, just like the pensions are. So now you have 2 big liabilities sitting out there, which really you had no asset to offset it. It was just a direct hit to the district. It's not like you got money to help fund it. And now the reality of it is, are you going to have to pay that? Who knows? If you did, every employer in the state would go busted because there's no more money available to cover that kind of debt. You'd have to raise taxes, bond issues. I mean, it'd be just a mass debt and tax increase across the state in order to try to fund this thing. So, in all reality, it's not going to happen. What could happen, though, really, for you all, and it's been mentioned too, it's called the ARC, your annual required contribution, of what you're required to pay each payroll to match on that percentage. Those percentages may keep on escalating to help put more money in, which that could be the real, true impact of you all, because you have a bigger impact each year on your budget of having higher costs to fund those pensions because they're going to put more in to try to catch up of where they're behind, from my standpoint. So that's, again, there could be a mixture of things there, plus just change the benefits and whole, a lot of things you're looking at, but that could be a really part of the change that could hurt you as a cost for the district for the increase in pension costs and OPEB costs. So those 2 things I want to mention to you, because you'll see some numbers in here I'll mention to you a lot that they have kind of in some ways misstated the financial statements because they're such a large number. You deal, each month when it comes in here, gives you a budget, and you look more at cash, what comes in and comes out. These pension stuff is not cash, it's all on paper. What it's done is we get what's called from actuaries, the state has actuaries go through and compute these numbers based on assumptions. And there's a lot of very fluctuation on assumptions. If you see here, if you change just the interest rate by 1%, it could have a major impact of that number. So with rates increasing as they are now, as the prime has been going up some in the last several months, it could have also the next calculation around, it could drop that liability some because of the prime going up. So again, it is a moving target from my standpoint. So you'll see, again, it has more impact on, there's 2 set of financials in here. We'll see the first one's called the government-wide, which what it is the district as a whole, but it tries to put your financials on a more of a business model. It's on like a full accrual, what we call. So if you're doing a business, it gives you a true picture of all your receivables, all of your assets, your campus, all your debt, what it may be. It gives just a true financial picture. Now, again, the pension's in there, and it's going to show that we're kind of tanking it into that number. The second set of statements are in here are called the fund, F-U-N-D, statements. That's really more about pots of money. And you'll see where you're seeing like the general fund, special revenue funds, which is the grants, capital outlay funds, construction funds, building funds. Those kind of things are by pots of monies that normally you receive those funds, and they're usually restricted, most of them are, except for the general fund, for a certain purpose. And that's what you'll see most time when Eric brings stuff to you of how those money are spent. And that really is how you live month to month by your funding. Not on the first statement. The first statement, all times really ever done, is when I come in once a year and give this to you. He won't present that to you each year, each month, because it's not how you operate. But it's kind of a snapshot when we do the audit of what it would look like if you were to bring everything together as one. So, kind of with those explanations, we'll move on through here. We'll go do this, and I'll touch on the other letters as we get back in the back of the document. If you turn on over to page in the document 4. This will try to explain to you a little bit. This was called the management discussion analysis. The slang is MD&A. And this is what Eric and Mr. Davis put together. We look at it and make sure that they're not too far off the mark. We don't give an opinion on this. We can't give commentary about an audit, about the district. This is a place for them to give commentary. Kind of where you've been, where you are, and where you're going. So it really is, truly is an informative piece of the document, because if a reader picks up somebody from on the general public wants to read, they'll tell you more right here about the district than I can. But it gives a good summary. Now we look at it to make sure Eric doesn't get too far off on the left of saying he did this when there's no way they did that. So we make sure there's no, ambiguities of information between here and the audit. So none of that was found to be in that case. So, but anyway, this is done by management, and it's our take a lot about the operations of the district. And that runs through, pretty much through page 11. Any questions on that? Again, as we're going, please feel free to stop and ask me questions, and we'll try to fill in those as we go. Then on page 12 is the first statement, which we call government-wide. And this, again, it breaks down between governmental activities and business type activities. The government activities are going to be everything. It might be easier as far as explain the business type activities. Those primarily are the lunchroom. Is that pretty much it?
We got
small.
We got lunchroom and daycares.
Daycare small. Those two are business type activities. Everything else goes to governmental from that standpoint. So you can see going down through there, like your cash, your investments, and some things will be the same thing here as it is over on the funds, because it's just what it is, it's cash investment. But now you see down here, like, you're sliding on down the non-depreciable capital assets, 2.4 million. That's going to be like your land improvements, things of that nature. Then the depreciable assets, that's going to be your structures, your equipment, your furniture fixtures, your buses, everything else that can be depreciated in the operations of the school district. And then you can see the amount of accumulated depreciation taken to date on those assets. So you see things called deferred inflows and outflows. A lot that's dealing with the pensions piece. And then also on some debt refundings, there's things in there too that's amortized for the gain and loss on the change of the debt structures. Then on the liability side, again, payables and things more of your current liability natures. But then you'll see down the bottom, your debt, your $2.8 million debt that's due in the next year, principal. Your compensating absences, that's your sick leave, your unpaid sick leave is computed. That's paid, again, that's a computation. It's not what's due, it's an estimate. Because it takes people with 5 years or 27 years plus, it's kind of an estimate of how much you would owe them. And it's weighted based on the years of service. So a person who has 27 years is going to be higher than somebody who has 5 years, because who knows what they'll be.
But this number seems like it has gone down from last couple of years ago.
You've had some retirements.
Yes, that's right.
Payouts. Yep. And then you'll see, and again, you'll see a current portion, the $400,000 is going to be people with 27 years plus. that could retire, and the $900,000 down there says beyond 1 year are people who are since under 27 years. So technically, at June 30, 18, you could have had $400,000 worth of amount due if everybody who had 27 years plus came in and gave notice. They didn't, but that would have been the liability that you had to pay out.
Inside that, some of the restricted funds that we did last year to put on the balance sheet, the committed funds, excuse me,
Yeah.
not restricted, but committed funds.
Yeah.
Correct. Thank you.
To help fund those obligations.
Correct.
Correct. Then you can see then the total debt that was beyond 1 year, 29.9 million. Then you jump on down, you see what's called the net OPEB liability, almost 3 million, and pension liability, 17 million. You actually have more debt in those two than you have in bonded debt. So
50% of what we have.
that's what I was trying to explain to you, and that went right to equity.
It's almost 50%.
Yeah. So that's what I'm saying is, like, last year the pension number was like 14 million, this year it went to 17, so we had a 3 million increase. And the OPEB is new this year, but it's the first year it was implemented, so this whole 17 million on it is the first year we put in place. So, again, some big changes right there. Any questions on that piece? Again, it's trying to give it on the overall district as a whole. And then on page 13, you'll see the pieces are tied to the pension and also the OPEB piece for some outflows, inflows. Then the net position. You can see the first category is net investment in capital assets. What that number is there, what it consists of really is taking your capital assets, which are on the top, less depreciation, less the debt tied to it. Kind of nets a debt to it to give you a net number of what's there as far as a value. And again, the numbers that are on these financials are at cost. But never at any kind of fair value is what you sell it for. It's what it actually costs you less a depreciation number charged. And then you'll see on the restricted categories, as Eric mentioned, there was some money for capital projects, like $900,000. That's primarily the Martin grant for the prior year that was remaining amount to be paid out for the park.
Agreement part?
Yep.
And then the Greenville Library, for that's a stock that's out there. It's been for years kind of sitting there restricted for that area. Then the rest of it is just unrestricted. Now you can see it's negatives across the board. Now, if you would, flip to your first graph, if you can, and this kind of gives you a comparison here. This gives you a 3-year comparison of your equity here on the government-wide. So you kind of get a feel. You can see where things are running. Like for your net investment, you actually dropped some last year, and this year you kind of picked up about $200,000 net increase. And what changes that depends how fast the debt pays down, how much additions you add, less how much depreciation you take. There's some plus and minuses that go through that calculation to get there. Because in the current year, you spend about $400,000 on some roof projects going through, and then there's about $57,000 spent so far on the park that was being done at Bremen. And then, of course, the depreciation was like at $3.2 million. And that's where on these financials, too, you'll see in a minute. I mean, you actually put in $3.2 million of depreciation charges in these numbers, too, as an expense. And then, likewise, debt was paid down $2.7 million in the current year. And you can see the restricted, it changed not much, really, a few thousand dollars. But again, at the year end, it was the $559 for the library and $963 for the park. You can see for the unrestricted this year, of course, it was 1.3 million, then went to 2.9, and this year it tanked to 12 million in the hole. Now, just to show you the impact here, if we were to pull it out, if we were to pull out the pension piece and pull out the OPEB piece, you would be sitting at a $22 million positive balance. So I kind of give you that side of it because they're in there, but there is not a true debt that you're going to have to write a check for on those $17 million items for OPEB and pension. So if we didn't have the OPEB pension here and you were still negative, I would say we have concerns. From that standpoint. But with those numbers pulled out, you can see that you're at a positive number, so.
So most all districts are going to be showing negative numbers.
Correct. Correct.
How we are compared to other districts?
Well, yours will be more because you got a big staff. The larger the staff, the larger the number, from
Right?
that standpoint, but none of them will,
Ratio-wise, operating ratio-wise, I'm saying.
yeah, I mean, most of them are showing negatives on these government-wide statements, on the same position like this. We do 7 districts total, including yours, and of all 7, none of them showed a positive number here on the government-wide. Because that's debt that's not funded by any kind of asset. It's a direct hit to your equity.
Right.
So, I mean, it's just, to add $34 million worth of liabilities with no assets, it's hard to recover anything. And what it's doing, the newer the campuses you are, the better the more you're able to sustain it. The older your facilities are, the less you are because you have less assets. Because that's the big number up here now is your campus. If you have a lot of new current assets that are less depreciation, you'll have a less impact here. Which really, for your size, you probably have less impact because you do have a lot more newer assets on the books, which would help offset that liability some at the top. Any questions on that piece? Okay, we'll flip it over to page 14. And this is the government-wide on the actual cost saving activities. On the far left is the expenses. Now, these expenses include depreciation. Like I said, like $3.2 million in here is on depreciation, which is not a cash charge. It's just a charge that you put for trying to consider the usage of your assets. And you can see you had like a 59.9, almost $60 million total government activities in the expense areas. I will tell you, last year, you don't see it, but I can tell you the number, it was $60.4 million last year. So you did drop some in the current year of the actual cost. Now, what it does, in the middle there, it says program revenues. You see charges, operating grants, capital grants. These monies are restricted monies, like grants, federal grants, things that can be used for a certain purpose to help offset your costs. On the far left, this is what it costs you to run this operation. Now, if it's going to be instruction, support, business, that's what it costs you to run that function within the district. The items in the middle is direct funding for certain purposes that can help offset those costs. So the far right is the net still cost that's unfunded for those functions that you're still in the hole. And you see the first part is government activities, down toward the middle of the page. The business type activities, you see school food, community ed, and daycare. And you can see those going across, likewise, of what the actual funding was versus the cost to know where you were on the far right, still of unfunded numbers. Okay. You go to the next page, page 15. Then this goes through, we have a part then comes through, it's the general revenues. These are revenues that you receive that's not really earmarked for certain things, it's just overall for the operations. Primarily like taxes, the state SEEK funds. It's not earmarked for any certain thing, but it's the running of the operation of the district. And that's where these monies are being used to, in a sense, offset those negatives we saw up there on the far right. So when it comes down to it, the governmental had a surplus of $700,000. This type of activities had a loss of $569 for a net of $158,000 approximately. Then you can see on down through there the impact of the new, what's called GASB 75. That's your OPEB this year. There was a $15 million hit. You can see there the equity. That was the actual amount of that number at the beginning of the 18 audit for 7/1/17, where it says, you know, the effect in the GASB 75 for the far right, $14,095,704. That Rose Fork giving you the total of $37 million too. Now, if you look at the second graph in your little handout, you can see the numbers between the general revenues and the program revenues. And you can see the program revenues actually dropped a percentage of the total, and general funds increased a percentage. And the reason that is being is, and this kind of caught everybody off guard, the state paid an extra large portion this year into the KTRF pension, which was not planned. In the prior year, they paid approximately $2.9 million. This year, they paid approximately $6.3 million. So that is on behalf payment for you all. So it does revenue and expenses, so it doesn't change the bottom, but it does change the gross numbers of expenses and revenues. And that's why the revenues were higher in the general fund, or general revenues, because of those increased pension numbers the current year. It's not true cash you get, but it does inflate. That's what I'm saying. These pension numbers and OPEB numbers do inflate some of your numbers sometimes because of on behalf payments. So when you get, it's more true when we get over there a little bit to the actual funds versus the government-wide statements here.
So the new OPEB,
OPEB.
that's just a new accounting process that had to go in, so those have to be booked now, whereas before
Correct.
they were not, and that's
It
what had
kicked in
to
this
prior
year.
with the pension. Okay.
Yeah, the OPEB is really health insurance, and they kicked in this year. This is the first year. The pension's been like 4 years back that it's been in place.
Wow.
Yeah, pension has been longer than we think it has been, but it's on the same theory of how it's done. It's just one's health insurance and one's pension. They're really similar in nature. And again, this year, actually from what you paid, you'll see on your fund statements compared to these statements here, there's about $1.4 million more pension cost and OPEB cost in these statements than the ones you receive, you'll show on the fund that you actually paid in with the actual requirements of the ARC. That when they pay in the actual monthly contribution by the salaries, there's $1.4 million in cost on these statements because of the actuary numbers that they're giving us to book based on those pension assumptions and things in here. So I'm saying on here, there's a lot of activity of non-cash amounts going through these financial statements that's really, it's hard to sort through the true impact sometimes.
It depends on the moment in time when they did those assumptions.
That's right, these pensions, because, like I said, this year, with the rates, I would think it would go down some. It depends on the earning course of the market. It's kind of tanked in the last month or two. So, the yields won't be as great on investments, but the rates have gone up, which it's kind of an offset going in different directions. I don't know how much it's going to fall out to the net. So that liability could go down some, which means then you would have less impact next year for an increase.
So if I'm understanding this from Lanny right, this was one of the things that all of our pension issues, one of the issues was, one group was basically saying they were going to bank on a 6%, and that was making the pension look like it was in worse shape. And the other said, well, we've been bringing in over 7% a year for the last several years. So if you banked on it, if you made that assumption, it was going to bring in over 7%, then the pension would not be in nearly as bad a shape as
if your yields were earning what you said.
But that's kind of using numbers.
Right.
And if you choose to use the 6, well, it looks like we're going to make a lot less. So that's something that we've ran into, and I have no way to know which, but I know the group that says the pensions are in better shape are trying to say, hey, over the last several years they brought in over 7%, and the other said, well, we're going to use 6% because that's safer, but that also makes it look like the pensions are in a lot worse shape.
Correct. There's several assumptions in that number, and again, the discount rate, which is the interest rate function of it all, is a huge component of that. So in the notes in the back, you'll see they take what your actual liability is, and what would the liability be if the rates increased 1% and decreased 1%. And you'll see back in the notes, it's a pretty big swing, just with a 1% swing. So there's just a lot of variability in these amounts that they can
Small notes just makes a big difference.
Yeah. So any questions on the statement?
Man, it's all about the pension then.
Pardon?
It's all about OPEB.
Yeah. It is, OPEB and pensions. And then over on the next graph is the expense piece of it. You can see likewise. And really the pension and stuff is just driving those areas. Then on the net change on the graph, the next one over, you'll see we have, you show like 5.1 million in the prior year and 108,000 this year. Again, what changed a lot from the prior and current year? There's a lot of things variable. Again, I mentioned the pension number, like a 1.4 million increase there. In 17, you got the Martin grant, which didn't repeat in the current year. Seek actually dropped some in the current year, about $607,000. There's a large franchise payment that came through in 17, didn't happen in 17 or 18. So there's a lot of things that was really good, but on 17 that rolled up that did not recur again in 18. That's what a lot of those decreases came from.
Where was that 1.4 million came from?
The pension, just the increase in pension costs from the last year to this year, that's in these government-wide numbers. Part of it will be OPEB and plus the increase in pension. Then there was, again, like I said, the Martin grant and then the franchise, they each were $1 million hits.
Franchise was about $980,000 that, if you recall, that we actually received it in July of 17, but it was applied to June because it was actually meant for that period. So it was applied at that point.
That kind of explains the government-wide. So if we would, our next one's on page 16. We'll get into the ones that really probably mean more to you. You're probably used to seeing the others. These are what we call the fund statements. And you see they're backed by funds. The general fund, which is what you all get every month with Eric, shows you most of your activity. And then the special revenue fund, which is really going to be your grants. Then the others are kind of lumped together. They're called non-major funds. It's going to be construction, capital outlay, debt service, and they're all lumped into one. In the back, there's more detail of that detail of that one category, but on here it's all lumped together. In the current year on the general fund, you had about a $2 million increase, and primarily it came into cash and investments. So a good increase from my standpoint. The special revenue actually increased to about $200,000, $300,000 too. And the other funds actually decreased some, primarily the constructions, because money was spent out from my standpoint. Then on page 17, you can see then the liabilities and the equity. Again, same kind of liabilities, the current liabilities, the payables, some accrueds, and then you have primarily then the fund balances, which is going to be your equity. The non-expendable are things like the equity fund balance, like inventory, prepaids, things you can't spend really, but it's been already spent out. Restricted, like I said, is really for the nature of restricted owners. It really is the $500,000, as already we saw earlier, was a library. To the far right, under the other governmentals, the 963 is going to be from the Martin project.
Agreement, yeah.
Yeah, but it came through, I think, the contribution.
Yeah, it came from a Gatton family, not Martin.
Okay, family, okay, I'm sorry.
Gatton's.
Family, okay, my apologies. So it's the $1 million contribution from the prior year that was spent. And then the unassigned is amounts that were POs that were outstanding at the end of the year that weren't paid out yet. They were committed, but not in a sense paid yet. Then the unassigned, like I said, is not committed. It's available. Now, if you look to the page on the next panel, the next draft, this shows the fund balance of the general fund. And this shows, you can see some of the stair steps, which is, again, there's been a lot of positive things done within the district in the last 3 years. I know there was some hard decisions from the board and management, but it's really turned around to where you're really in a good position today.
That's what we want to hear.
And you can see it actually increased about 1.9 million in the current year. And kind of it's kind of a crude gauge I always use to see on liquidity of how stable the general fund is to see how many times what you have in equity to cover expenditures. If your funding were to cease, how long would you survive without getting new money in? And, you know, I got some districts that are at less than a month, which means it's really, really, really tight.
It's like TSA workers.
Yeah. And right now, I mean, at times, y'all were pretty tight too at one time.
Yeah.
And now, actually, you come back up to about 6 times coverage of monthly expenditure. You'll spend about $2.7 million a month. And with your 18.2 since you get close to that amount. Well, really, it's 17.2, but it's unassigned. So my norm kind of to run for really is anywhere from 1 to 3. Anything above that, it's kind of, you're above and above at that point. And again, like school food, when they come monitor, anytime you have above a 3-month coverage, they're going to ask you to start spending monies down. Buy new equipment, do something with that, from my standpoint. So that's why it's important to go through. I think we introduced this stuff a few years ago of doing commitments of these funds. And again, something you may want to look at again is come through and commit some of these funds. Because right now, you really don't have any commitments tied in here for this year. Now, you may have for 19, may have come through. And you may want to look at it again by the end of 19, from my standpoint.
Now, Lanny, is that 6 month, is that taking into account the 2.5% raise that everyone got? So it's actually lower than that now.
It could be now. This is only based on the 18 activity numbers.
Right.
Based on what 18 was running. So, yes, you have to factor in any kind of increases of
It's
cost.
roughly 5 now,
So,
but based on our current expenses, it's about 5. So we're still above.
still in a good position,
Yes.
from my standpoint. But the thing is, like, if you were to go through and if you have some future expenditures for, transportation, repairs, large repairs, and any construction projects, because for a while, I know you all went kind of lean on things, and so if there's things now you may need to address, things are in a better position, this is where the board will go in and commit those funds.
It's like the HVAC projects at East and West.
So that's just some thought process where, to go through and commit those funds to where, because what you want to do is, you don't want anybody to see the fund and think, well, there's a lot of excess funds out there and there's no intended use for that excess. And you want to go through and try to kind of earmark those things that you really do have a purpose. Even, they're in there, but it's not just kind of excess money that you just got out there for no reason. Because if you go in and vote for a 4% increase or whatever, why am I doing that? If I send it all as excess, it will be a question the public may have. But again, if you want to commit it, because you may have a purpose for those funds, it'll have to explain why you are, because you still need those funds for other things that you maybe not addressed in prior years, but now you plan on addressing them because they need to be addressed for the district. So the commitment piece can add more transparency between what you have here to communicate back to the public and to KDE too, and also the legislators.
And that's what we did on the fiscal year 19 working budget. If you recall, in September, we did commit funds, and it's on the balance sheet at this time. So for this fiscal year, so.
And you can look at those again by the end of June and true them up and and you can revise those commitments. The good thing about a commitment is, at any meeting, you can, with a stroke of the pen, you can modify those numbers. So you're not in a corner you can never get out of. So
I like you said, the transparency of it. We started talking about, a year ahead, the HVAC stuff, and folks really seem to understand that better. We said, this is going to cost about this much, end up costing a little bit more. But, we put that out there so it was, like I said, very transparent. Here's why they're sitting on some money. Part of the reason now would be also kind of wondering what's going to happen with the pension and the budget still, pension now, and TVA. There's obviously concern there about how that may hit us as well.
And just kind of touch over to one other fund too you have is called, the school food. And it's running a little tight, from my standpoint. When you look at their activity, they're running about $249,000 a month, and you got about 1.5 months coverage on school food. So I talked some with Eric, some before, in the past, you all have gone through, and let's call it charging indirect cost to the school food. Indirect cost, if it's charged to school food, is to give money out of school food back to the general fund, just to help offset some of the operating costs the general fund incurs on behalf, insurance, utilities. There's a lot of things that runs for the school food. But you may need to back off that some because it's kind of getting low now. But what you don't want to do is get so low, then the general fund has to subsidize the fund because now you've drained it too much that it can't absorb the activity it needs to take. my standpoint, so, but it's nowhere panicked yet, but it's getting pretty tight, so that's something we have to watch.
We did. It has been stopped.
So, anyway. Any questions on that graph? You kind of see again the stair steps. And again, I think management has done a pretty good job as far as they've been easing cost in and kind of taking a step and seeing the impact and making sure they don't go too far in one way to create a problem with what you've been through. So, and again, I would recommend, I agree with them, is to ease into things. And I think they've done some things over the last several years to help make sure they're taking small steps.
Yes.
That you don't take a big step and go somewhere you don't want to go, have to make other actions that you won't have to go back and do again. It could be a tough decision. So I think the board, along with management, all of y'all are doing the right measures in the right ways to get back into your proper position to work and get more current now, from my standpoint.
So if we stop doing the direct costs, do we have to catch that up at some point, or is it just,
Well, I don't know. You have to ask them, can you stop in the middle of the year?
We did. We already have. We
got okay?
confirmed with the state. We stopped them. And so once the funds true up more, we'll go back and look at it. You know, initially, when it was done because general fund dollars were tight. And so it was just it was a way to help offset some general fund costs. So we continue to do that, and then now as it's making a stronger impact to food service, we decided that, you know, with discussion with Robbie, myself, and Laney, we said, okay, let's stop that. Terry and I went to food service, talked it over with them, called the state, we've stopped it. So now once we kind of get, again, that's where we're kind of just going to back off, see where we land.
you don't have to make up what you stopped, it's just at our discretion?
Correct.
And it's an annual election too. I mean,
Okay.
each year you decide to do it or not.
Gotcha, okay.
So if by chance, a year, 2 years from now, you decide it again, it's not like you stop now, you can't do it again. You can make the election start it again. It just, you want to make sure you've got enough funds. Again, when the general was needing more money and there was more money in the school food, it made sense to do that, to kind of help offset the general fund. Now it's kind of flipped to where the general's better and the school food's kind of, so now we kind of need to kind of ease that indirect cost probably way until it gets more.
And you can also name the rate. They've got a maximum indirect cost rate that the state puts out for each district. It varies per district, but if, you know, I believe it was 12.1 or something % last year, but if we decide, look, we want to do it at 6%, we could do that, but at the beginning of the year, we have to name that and say, that's what we're going to do. We sign a piece of paper that gets sent to the state, to KDE, and then it goes from there.
Okay, page 18. This is just one schedule here. You know, we talked about the government-wide in the front, you know, the funds. It takes the equity and it just does a reconciliation between the two. So like it starts at the top of fund balance, the fund balance for when we saw, you know, like it has the capital assets, you know, it takes in the debt and things where it's the plus and minuses to kind of come to the one type to the other type. Kind of shows you what are the differences between the two segments. And primarily it's debt and capital assets. So those two numbers should tie back to your equity numbers in each one of those statements. Okay? Next page, 19. This shows the revenues and expenses for the fund statements. You can see for the general fund, you show 46.4 million, and it's about 44.7 million. And again, some of the stuff that's going to be here is on behalf number increase again from the KTRS. And then also, like I said, we dropped some on the franchise, and also we dropped some from the contribution for the park from the prior year. And that shows all the revenues by the funds. Then if you go over to the next page, you can see the actual expenditures. And the key thing on page 20, what you want to watch for, is in the middle of the page, you'll see where it says excess, deficiency, revenues over expenditures. You'll see for this year, it's $1,917,801. That's a key number. That's showing how much the operation is really, in sense, supporting the general fund activity. So anytime you're showing negative there, what you have in the past sometimes, that means you've got more coming out than coming in. So I mean, that's about as simple as I make it. I mean, you've overcommitted yourself. And the biggest thing that can cause that to happen is get your salaries out of line. Because salaries are an annuity cost. They keep every year plus maybe some increase or whatever, steps and things happen, where if you did a bus purchase or a capital asset purchase, it's a one-time hit. It hits that 1 year, but then next year it goes away, so it won't be a recurring item. Salaries can deplete. So that's something to always watch for. And again, but you're in a good position there from my standpoint. And I think, in 19, you've had some actual increases, which will, as Eric mentioned, the 2.5, whatever, which will reduce it some for the next year. Then the other piece you can see is the transfers. You can see on the general fund, there's $159,000 coming in, then $158 going out where it paid out to other funds. So the net of the general fund had a $1.9 million increase. So it's a very strong increase for the current year. With those kind of increases, again, that's where you're going to do those commitments, because that's putting money aside for some of those projects you're talking about you're needing.
Plus, with the 2.5% salary increase will undoubtedly change that number.
Also, too, correct. And then the special revenue funds, pretty much are break even. They're again, the grants, most grants you have are cost reimbursement. You incur $1 and you get funded for $1. So it's just a wash. And then the other governmental funds, likewise, the money that's left over primarily is because of the construction from the donation from the park, for the construction fund. If you go to the next graph, you can see the revenues, for local revenues and state revenues of the 2-year comparison. And again, you'll see the state revenues went up a lot because of the KTRS. Again, on behalf payments, we talked about the increased payments. They're like $2 million versus $6 million this year. That's what caused a huge jump as far as the state revenue. Not true cash, but more on behalf. Then on the next graph, you'll see expenses. And there's a typing error on this one. I'll tell you, I called it in my review and I didn't catch it before it got printed. If you look there on the instruction, it says 63%. It should actually be 68%. And the administration says 16, it should be 11. Which coincides with the increase of the cost of the revenue for the pension piece, because it's a revenue increase in pension, it's the same thing. It also caused the administration to drop. And actually, plant went up some, but construction went up so much because of the KTRS, it really dropped. But you did spend more this year in transportation for some buses. You see the 8-9%. Bought some buses in the current year, about $700,000 worth, I think it was, approximately. On student transportation, the buses, 8 to 9%.
Yeah, that's the year we bought the buses.
Then on the next graph, you can see here is the net change. And you can see how you went from, the belt was really tight in 16, got a little bit looser and a little bit looser. And again, that's where you've had a plan of action to kind of, for salaries and different costs, to kind of ease back into this situation once you kind of got stable. And it's been a well-planned a plan of action that was done well by the board and by the management. Then on the last graph, This shows again the fund balance on the general fund. You can see the assigned. You had less this year assigned, which is going to be the open POs for the year. Prior year was more open POs, less open POs this year. Non-expendable is really for insurance, prepaid items, inventory. Last year, I think it's more prepaid items, insurance things were in there. This year, it was not as much. Restricted, again, is the library and the park activity. And committed is zero, which will change, I'm hearing for next year, that will come around and be different, which I think it needs to be. Then if you look, see, on your your unassigned, really, you've increased $7 million from 16 to 18. So some pretty good increases still, from that standpoint, in the equity. So you've got a little room that kind of still easing into some things. And that's where I think it's going to be, again, good, if it's HVAC or whatever it may be, you're going to need to help use some of those funds to go ahead and commit those. Because that will change next year. These balances will go different. Because now these unassigned, you'll start seeing some negative terms going downhill and reallocating it back over to committed. So the people won't say, well, why keep on stair step and increasing more? Well, you're going to be reshifting those funds for the intended use of those.
And we've done that.
We got trained together.
We've committed for the HVAC.
Yeah, that's one thing with the train.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's one thing.
Yeah, we've done that.
Okay.
Yeah, we've done that.
No, that's good.
Yeah, it'll be on your January balance sheet, you'll be able to see the committed funds.
The 7 something, yeah. 7.
6 or 7, seemed like we committed.
We added more.
Yeah, we ended up spending a little more than that. I think we ended up with a $9 million commitment. I thought we did both. But we committed 6, it seems like.
Well, not quite that much, because the unassigned funds that are committed were less. We had the outlay for unassigned funds has been less than the 5 million, so it's a good thing. I mean, we have some, but it gives us opportunity to commit those funds in other areas if we have some other projects,
But
which we do.
But overall total project for both schools, $7.something million, doesn't it?
It's about 9.2.
9 point, yes.
Yeah.
One was 7, they added for 2
Correct.
million, they took
And
picked up
this-
another one.
Now, the $7 million project, it would have, cash outlay was significantly less than the other, than the 9.2. However, the 9.2 is still well under what, in my models, I would have felt pressure on, so it's significant. It's still under what we would have predicted.
And Alan, did you do anything on sick leave too?
I did.
Okay.
Yes, sir.
How much did you drop from 2017 to now on sick?
And payouts?
Yeah.
I'd have to look that up to give you a
It
definitive
is a
answer.
big drop, I
Yeah.
bet.
You're talking about sick days?
You remember when?
Was it like 150,000 or 118,000? What was it?
It was about a 10 or 12% reduction
It's over 100,000.
on sick. So you can do it like the sub payout.
Sick days.
Sub-payouts.
Yeah.
Sub-payouts, yeah, one time it was over $400,000.
That was the year we had 42 retired.
Yep.
Oh, it was? Okay.
Significant amount retired, we had quite a bit of sick leave out that year.
That's awesome.
Okay. Good questions. Am I going too slow? Yeah, am I supposed to speak up any?
If you're going through every one of these pages like this.
No, we're going to speed up in a minute. We're fixing to hit the speed dial.
Quick order pizza.
For page 21, again, this shows the reconciliation between the two statements and the net change. And you can see again, it's going to be tied to capital assets and debt. Just the cost, like last one too. Page 22 is the school food we talked about. And you can see those numbers there. Now again, the pensions are also in here. And also the pensions are in the, an OPEB too is in this number. So it also, as you'll see on page 22, it's got about $2.9 million, 2.8 well, almost $3 million in total on all funds. So it's got a pretty big hit too on the OPEB and net pension too. That's why it kind of distorts the numbers. That's where on page 23, it's showing a negative 1.7 million approximately rounded up. If you add the 2.8 million back, you actually come back to a $1.1 million surplus in those funds. So again, nothing to worry from that standpoint, but the pension does kind of have a negative impact. On school food, on page 24, pretty much had a net about $20,000 difference between the loss of fundings of self-pay versus the federal reimbursement increase. You had a drop, I think about 6% drop in participation in lunches and about 1.5–2% drop in breakfast in the current year. So the way on the CPP program you work is have volume. So anyway, you really need to try to increase the participation. That's the way you make money on those programs.
Enrollment has a significant impact on that, does it?
Yes.
I thought, okay.
Enrollment does, but also participation. I mean, I've seen a lot of schools get really creative in the school food.
And Joe's really good at it, so I mean, she works really
I'm not
hard.
saying it's not, but I mean, you have some drops, but I've seen some
Right.
schools that have pickups, some pretty good increases in
And
those
actually
areas.
looking like a second chance breakfast kind of thing now for folks, kids who come in late and all that. So she's going to visit another school system and take a look at that, which is a creative way to try to get participation as well.
And that's pretty much, now on page 25 is the cash flow statement, and then one thing to watch here at cash did, you'll see on bottom of 25, cash did drop $241,000. So there was some spending this year in cash on coming
She had
out,
some equipment costs that she had to,
payout.
yeah.
And that's, well, then on page 27, that is, you then get into what's called the activity funds, which really is the activity fund, school funds for the clubs and such. On page 27, that shows the asset and then the liability back to the schools. Okay, page 28 starts the notes. We're not going to go through these notes. I will tell you what the notes are. The notes give you a detailed description of your policy and procedures of how things are recorded. If you want to get more in depth, like some of the numbers in the front, it may show more detail of those numbers in the back here. It breaks them down some. So we won't go through these, but that's kind of what they reflect. And so we'll start going through some quick pages here. Page 41. You can see there that just shows the detail of the cash investments by fund. Then it breaks it down on page 42, what's CDs and the stocks. Page 44 shows you on the capital assets, and we saw the detailed cost. Here it gives you the breakdown by type: buildings, equipment, vehicles. Your additions are going to be your new purchases. Retirements going to be your sales or disposals in the current year on page 44, coming down to an ending number for your governmental funds and then for your business type funds. That kind of gives you more detail. Page 46 is going to show your bonds. Starts there. Then 47 shows the detail of those bonds of the each year, of the maturities of the principal interest. You'll see in there it says School Construction Commission. The state participates in part of your bond issues, pays part of the cost for you on some bond issues, and you have the other part. You're still responsible for all of it. That's approved on a biannual basis by the state, but they've since each year have approved it, so that will be their commitment of the total. Page 48, this shows changes in the debt. You see you paid up there on page 48 at the top, 2.7 million was paid. And then you see on your compensating absences, actually it increased a little bit. It was 1,000,003 last year, 1,365. 1,312 last year, so $50,000 so increase. Note 6, this shows the fund balance that we talked about having the committed, the assigned, unassigned. Next year, you'll see again in the committed section on page 49, something in there for you on those areas. This year was nothing. Page 49 through page 70. is pension and OPEB. I was just trying to find one page on the turn page to 58. This is what I was trying to explain to you how the impact can be. This kind of just gives you an eye-opener. On page 58, and this is going to be on the SERS. Right now, you're showing $17,020,000, you see in the middle of the page there, $17,020,000. That was your liability at the end of June 30, 18. If the rate, if the actual discount rate increased 1%, it drops to the $13.2 million. If it goes up 1%, it takes it to $21.5 million almost. So that's what I was saying, just little assumptions of a 1% change has a dramatic impact on that calculation. So, a lot of variables. I just want to kind of show the impact, how that 1% can really.
You have the same one, page 70 on the healthcare.
Correct. You can see it went from 5.8 to 4.5 versus 7.4.
Can I ask a question?
Sure.
Why did the OPEB get thrown into local this year for the first time? Am I understanding you correctly?
This is the first year for it.
Right.
This is the first year OPEB kicked in as for recorded on final statements. And OPEB has two pieces. The SERS, in sense, has two pieces. There's a life insurance piece and a health insurance piece. You pay 100% of the health insurance and a certain percent, and there's a certain percentage of things on the life. 100% on the life too. On KTRS, in a sense, you pay a percentage on the pension, you pay nothing. But on OPEB on KTRS, you do pay something on it. So it also carries over on OPEB. So where in the past, KTRS didn't have anything for pensions for OPEB. I mean for pension because the state paid it all.
Right.
On OPEB, the state does not pay it all.
Right.
The district pays part of the cost. Now, I think the state pays 100% of the life insurance piece of it, but the health insurance piece, the district picks up more, I think 60-40 or something like that was, if I remember right.
How was it done before?
It was never, it was just, the liability was never booked. It just, whatever you paid in, for the state goes, the state paid it, and if you're 3-4% was on salary, Eric would pay it in when salaries were never paid each time, write a check to the state, and just pay that with each payroll.
Randy, what was the reason do you think that the state required to book it now?
It's because standards kicked in this year.
It's GASB. So GASB is Government Accountability Standards Board. It's a federal thing. So
It's nationwide.
Yeah, so the government said, okay, so we're going to implement this now. And then, we've had GASB 68, which was pensions. Now it's GASB 75, which is this OPEB. They've been out there in the ether. It's always been there, but now the government says, okay, you're going to write it down on paper and show what your liability truly is. So it's no longer a mystery. So that's all that is. So really, the timing of it is strictly just when the federal government said, okay, you guys are going to do this. So right now there's GASB rules that are out there that are looming out there. I don't know what the next big one is, but I think there's another one coming out.
GASB 84.
Yes, that's it. And so it's out there, but it's not going to hit us. And when's the implementation on that one?
20.
Yeah. So you see what I'm saying? So at that point,
That's tomorrow.
2020.
Yeah, that's almost here, maybe next year.
Yeah, but it won't have, it's more of a reporting thing. thing than it is a financial thing. I mean, pensions and OPEB have been looming out there for a long time, and really, it's not federal.
It don't make sense.
Governmental entities have their own accounting rules, and like the public entities, and then for-profit entities have their own, it's called FASB and GASB, the two kind of staff standards bodies that gives accounting principles we follow to report by. And GASB wrote this policy as far as OPEB and pensions, and what it did, it tried to put, a lot of times they were footnoted or just note out there, they were never on the financial statements, the true liability. Now they're showing it on the financial statements.
And Lane, what this is saying is that worst case scenario, everybody cashed out.
Right. But there's probably no reality to some sort. I mean, it gives you a picture, but there's probably really no reality to that, because if everybody cashed out, there'll be a lot of,
1920.
I mean, it's just, you know, nobody could pay out and cash out. There's too many negatives across the state, and because like for CSRS, you got counties, you got libraries, you got fire districts, you got, I mean, you know, there's all kind of entities are in those pension funds. And so they offer the same thing as you all have to come up with the funds to pay, and they don't have that. Because what you did, you put a liability on the books with no assets. So you just depleted everything you had by putting them on there.
So that'll be, we'll just have a new norm now as we start looking at numbers. We'll be, at least next year, we can't compare to this year. Right now, there's such a change. It's hard to compare this year's numbers with,
Well,
make any sense of.
on the government-wide, those are the ones that really get you, because that's where the pension liability is booked. But you get to the funds, all in the school food, the general funds like that, they don't have those liabilities booked. Now, what does kind of distort sometimes is those on behalfs. Because, you know, if the state decides to pay more for the pension piece, it's going to distort your true expenses and true revenues, because really you didn't pay it, it's just what they pay on your behalf, which kind of distorts your true cash payment that you pay here to operate month to month. That's why they got to be pulled out. I mean, for a long time, actually when you budgeted at one time when it first started, they didn't require you to even include on behalfs, because it would kind of mislead the boards of what your true cash outlay is. But now they ask you to do that, and it kind of somewhat distorts, because it's really not a true cash outlay that you pay.
And when we go over the budget in a few minutes, I've actually got that on here, and I'll show you kind of what it does for us.
Thank you.
And then on page 72, it shows transfers and funds that were negative in the current year. Page 73, here's on behalfs. And this, like I was saying, this kind of gives you a good scenario. You have $13 million in these finance statements that's on behalf payments. And it tells you what fund they were hitting in, then at the bottom, what they were for. So you can see the KTRS, $6.2 million. That was a huge from a $2 million last year or something. Page 74 is budget to actual, general fund. Again, you end up with a positive variance. Again, you don't have to budget your contingencies really, so you'll carry over, a good carryover always from that standpoint. Page 76 is the budget to actual for really school activity funds. I'm sorry, special revenue funds, which will be the grants. This one really, to me, is kind of a waste. It's a requirement by GASB, but really don't show you a whole lot, because grants are run from year to year. They can fluctuate from that standpoint. Page 78 shows the trend here of the pensions. You can see from 15 to 18 on KTRS. This schedule will build out for 10 years. Same thing for 79, or I'm sorry, 78, or page 80 for the CSRS. Then we'll start building one now for the OPEBs on page 82. A third of the report is all pension and OPEB, with schedules and footnotes. Page 85, it just shows you the detail of the funds, the front we saw. You see the construction fund makes up a big difference in those numbers there on those funds. Same thing on page 86. It shows the operating statements for those funds. You can see the debt service, the SEEK, building fund, construction fund. Page 87, likewise, is on the property fund types, primary daycare, and community education. It shows their balance sheets and their operating statements and the cash flow statements.
What does our daycare look like?
I'm sorry?
I was just looking at the daycare numbers.
Daycare. Daycare actually lost $9,000.
9. Between, how many do you have? Mr. Dave? 4 daycare?
So we've added longest, central, and
That should include South Elementary.
No, not
elementary
yet.
be on this one.
No,
So just the two other than that.
The longest and Central.
between them, they lost 9.
But now, some of that, a little of that could be some pension numbers in there too.
Yes.
Some costs there, so I might have to, I can kind of massage those out to give a true loss. So there could be a little bit in there, a few $1,000. just for
Are they
pension.
running in the blank, Terry, do you know? Or-
They are,
Yeah.
they're
They are.
tight, but yes.
Yeah, but-
Longest is not, longest is booming. Central
Yes.
City and South Elementary are, you
Central
know, South
City
Elementary's
almost-
only been up 6 months.
Right,
So it's
right.
not really a fair assessment.
No.
But
Central City always suffered,
August is doing very well,
And-
always has.
and
Really.
June and July kills them
It does, exactly. It
because of
sure
the
does.
payment and everything. But if they're, breaking even, we need to keep that open, all I say.
So what's making that number look bad is against those pension.
Could be some in there, I don't know how much is in there, there's some allocation of pension costs going through those.
Although not the largest number, 9,000, if you look at it,
There's a lot of employees that are paid out of that, so that would be significant. The pension would probably be significant in that, because they're full-time.
For instance, one of the things I looked at was food service, and I looked at their staffing costs, and I looked at my initial glance at it and jumped, and I thought, oh my goodness, what have we done? And so we went back and we looked at it and started researching and realized, okay, the vast majority of that is in this pension cost. And so we said, okay, we're, pull a step back from the cliff. We're not there. It was something where you look, your initial glance, you kind of, you have a gasp moment, but it's not. There were some, it's fun, it's the expenses that we really don't typically see in that respect.
I think I had that number for you, I think.
I want to say it was a $160,000 increase in staffing costs, but it was,
You had a $370,000 increase in wages and salaries,
yeah.
and $275 was pension. And OPEB, that number too, it's like pension. Page 90, this just shows the activity funds. Beginning cash receipts, disbursements, ending balances. And then you're required to show, the state required to show detail about activity funds on the high schools, and the 2 high schools are shown here in detail by fund. That carries on over to page 98.
Oh, 98.
Yeah, well, through 98 is the high school activity fund also. I'm trying to hit speed dial for you. Then on page 99 is the actual, called federal award schedule. This is all your federal money you receive on your federal grants. And the current year school food was the major program we looked at. Approximately $5.1 million in federal awards. Now, we will get into 2 more letters. Page 103, this letter goes with government auditing standards. It looks at controls, all the financial statements, and actual compliance with laws and regulations that are direct and material to financial statements. You do not have any findings. Let me kind of give you a real quick scenario again. Remember, on the controls, you have 3 levels of the actual reporting. You have one, the top is called material weakness. And material weakness is, if you have that it's severe, that there's a lack of controls that will not detect a material misstatement. So that's the worst you could get if you have material weakness, because that means controls are so weak, and after you go out wrong, and now you detect that there are material errors going through them. The next level is called a significant deficiency. It's kind of in the middle. It's not material weakness, but it's one where we felt like it's probably enough to report to the Board of Governors that what we brought to your attention, from my standpoint. Those are the 2 levels that go in this letter. Then there's like a 3rd level, really 2 more levels really, that do not go in this letter at all. The next level goes to what's called a management letter, and it's called just a control deficiency, and it's just for checks and balances. I think we found it would better do your systems and procedures if you consider this control. Then the 4th item really is just called an improvement point. That's more of an efficiency thing or operational thing that we think will help you improve operations. Not really a control thing, but just more operational issues. So, for this letter here, you do not have either significant deficiencies or material weaknesses, so a good report from a standpoint, from a control standpoint, and no compliance issues to report likewise. We did have a management letter, which we'll see in the back. Page 105 is the letter dealing with the federal programs. Same way here for controls and compliance. The program that was major this year was the school food. You did not have any type of compliance, control issues. We did have a compliance item from that standpoint. And what it was is when we were going through looking at school food, and we do sampling of disbursements, I think there was 37 checks on school food account this year. 10 of them we had errors on. And really, it was kind of an odd, there must be a lot of checks written with part, is on the uniform reimbursements. And what we look for is a sign-off by the school food director approving those. And it was lacking that visible sign-off of approval. Other disbursements did, but for some reason, that type of disbursement was not being signed off on. So that's what caused the error this year. So we suggested that uniform reimbursements would be like the other expenditures.
She's correct.
Have this sign off on that.
She took it to heart very quickly.
It's an easy fix.
Yeah.
And there's nothing found what we call question cost. It wasn't like it was improper or fraud. It's just a documentation thing of showing the approval process. And that's really on page 109, that finding. You'll see it on page 109. And then on page 110 is management's response called the corrective action plan of how they plan to address the comment. Page 112. This starts what's called the management letter. And these are things, again, I told you in the lower level, and it's things where, we've gone through and found suggestions from controls or efficiency standpoint. There's 3 things, from the central office level. And then the rest of the schools primarily are related to what's called the Red Book. It's for the activity funds, or those types of compliance items, just some things that need to be corrected from a paper standpoint. As you see on the first page there, only, it's 4, 6, 9 total, so not a lot compared to what it used to be. So we've had several Red Book trainings here over the years, and I think there's been a definite improvement of understanding of the requirements of the Red Book, which has cut down likewise on a lot of the actual comments here. And then it shows on prior year, all prior findings were corrected. From that standpoint. That's really an overall view of the financial statements. That last letter, you'll see in the back of that letter, it goes to the Board of Governors because it's board access. It kind of tells you that we were independent on the process. Management, again, was cordial in our work with us. It's always a pleasure working with the crew here at the board. They always are very professional in their duties. And again, we were independent, and we did not find any material fraud from that standpoint in our procedures. So, those are some things we're supposed to communicate to the board as a summary part of that.
And as you guys can imagine, Eric and Terry in that game, there's a lot goes into
No, we
that
appreciate
time of
you,
year
Mr.
where I just
We do
smile at Terry from a distance and wave. Every now and then throw her a cupcake or something. It's a stressful time, and they did really, really, really well.
I also think it's important to note that, Laney commended us, and I appreciate that, but I also want to commend Laney's team, who is always
Shorter the
very,
race.
very, very good to work with. Again, they don't go easy on us. They always point out anything that we're doing incorrectly, but they do it in such a manner that we work as a team and we correct these things. And that's why we're on the prior year findings. You'll see that they're all corrected. So we don't have ongoing issues. It's just something, if they find something, they tell us, and they're very, very good about it. They'll call Terry, they'll call myself, and say, hey, we found this. Let's work on how we can correct this. So, Laney, we appreciate you and your team, so thank you.
And Laney, I aggravate you about the time, but we wanted to have a work session or a special call meeting for this and the budget, because I wanted him to go through it slowly like he did with us, so you guys could get a better understanding. And it's still difficult, still a lot, but well done.
Yes,
and
thank
appreciate your time.
You've done that down really good, lady. That's really hard for you.
And the thing too, it's a mutual thing. It's always good to have a client that's willing to listen and work with you. Because again, I don't see you all as much as I do with these folks.
No, nice.
And you've been through some tough times. And we've had some tough decisions behind closed doors of how to maybe to have an approach, do something. And I think y'all have taken it very professionally and done some good jobs of where you were. It's never fun to come where you were, but y'all have done an excellent job. Okay, so again, I commend this board and the manager because you've had to make some hard decisions that have not been popular decisions. But you did what you would do as a fiduciary duties of this district. So again, I commend that for your integrity. Because some places I've been, they have not done that, and the state will come in, and the state will take over the district. Because if the board's not willing to make the call, they will make it for you.
Yeah, that's the worst thing can happen.
So again, I commend you all for making those tough decisions, especially when you come in an elected position. Sometimes that's not the most popular, but you did what was right. And so again, I commend you from that standpoint.
Thank you,
I
Laney.
give that guy over on the end a whole lot of credit for that.
Thank you, Darryl.
Especially for, not the second guy, the first guy. No, he really went through some abuse over shortage of money, which was not his control or anything to do with it. It's just a shame. Nobody comes and commends him now, except a few people who know the
truth. So again, it just, we don't try to play any certain way. We call it right down the middle. And that's kind of where it is. And so I always like to at least give people recognition that do make some hard decisions. They did the right thing. And again, we always appreciate working with clients that want to listen and try to, because again, we try to give advice, and not we're always right, but together we work together, I think, and we work together as a good team from that standpoint. So, but again, we appreciate the opportunity to serve the district.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Lane.
Thank you.
All right, thanks again. We're going to move on down to the review of the draft budget for the fiscal year 19. Eric?
Before we start, I gotta look fast. Y'all can go ahead and start without me.
I can wait.
All the requests, no more.
That's on record.
This is
$1,200, but all right.
Genesis draft, is that tentative? Where are we on here?
I'm sorry. That's a typo.
Is it?
It is draft. My apologies. Yeah.
Just want to clarify that.
Okay, thank you.
I'll fix that header.
And Laney, feel free to, you don't have to stay for any more. You got to drive by. Okay.
Yeah.
This is a great speech.
Next time I'm gonna surprise you.
That's tomorrow.
If I bring it back, you have to take it though.
Okay.
No, get back to it.
Make sure it's a box full of cash. You buy all the puppies you want.
I'm thinking auditor hates to hear a box full of cash. Probably makes you nervous, doesn't it?
He smoked us, so
long as they don't care.
Really doesn't.
I am going to go over this document. It does say tentative budget, but it is the draft budget, and I apologize. I updated a previous item that I had created. Forgot to adjust the tentative word. So really what I do want to do is kind of go, especially kind of for you as well, Kim, but kind of go over the budget process for the state, just so we understand that what goes on. There are 3 phases of when we do a budget for the district. The first phase being the one that we're doing tonight is a draft budget. That's due by January 31st. The board has to approve that at that point. The second step is the tentative budget, which then pulls in some more funds. That is May 31st. That's the one that we submit to KDE. And they go through and we go back and forth on making sure things balance and those sorts of things. Then the final step is the working budget, and that's the one that the board passes in September. And that's the one that we operate from for the rest of the year. Any changes that are made at that point go through the board if we have to reallocate funds on a grand scale. So this one, the draft budget, what this budget is, it focused mainly on the general fund. It does have all the other funds in there, but really those are just carryover from the previous year. The draft budget is mainly the framework by which we start the budgeting process. When I look at it, basically it's like you're framing the house. The tentative budget starts running wire, your plumbing, those sorts of things, and the working budget's like your trim work and all that kind of stuff, if we want to put an analogy to it. So we'll kind of go through the revenues and expenses. You'll notice that on that first page where it says all funds, it'll go through the fund and has revenues and expenses. Basically, we have a $0 budget. So our revenues, equal the expenses. Whatever isn't put into an actual item, like an expense item gets dropped into contingency, that's where it zeroes it out. Okay, does that make sense? Okay. So this year, general fund is about $62.2 million. That's about 86% of our overall budget. Special revenue, again, that's just a carryover from the previous year. It's about almost 4.7 million. It's a 6.5%. Capital outlay and building fund, those are items that actually cover our debt expenses that we have annually. Our debt service, you'll see it's at 3.7. That covers all the debt service. It's on behalfs, everything that.
What is the first number covers? You said debt expense.
The capital outlay and building funds, we can use those funds to make debt service payments.
Okay.
Some of this actually, these funds get shifted to debt service. So it's not, when you add it all up, it's 72 million, but really you're taking some funds and moving it from one fund to another, but we have to show it to you on paper what those funds we expect to spend out of each one of them. So some of those are in fund transfers, kind of like when Laney was talking about fund transfers. So we'll have to transfer funds from capital outlay and building fund into debt service. So that will make up some of that revenue that goes into that fund. And I'll break it down more on paper when we go into other budgets, or I can kind of lay it out for you and just kind of show you how that fund, so we take it from this bucket and we put it in this bucket to pay for the expenses out of there. But we need to show it on paper that this is what we expect to have in this fund and this fund, and then these are the revenues and expenses out of Fund 400. Food service, about 3.4. Daycare operations, 331,000, for a total, again, of 72.5 million. So, moving down to general fund. The beginning balance is about 16.8. Local revenue, about 15.2 million. State revenue, which includes SEEK, is 18.5, almost 18.6. On behalf is about 11.3. And really, it could be adjusted up a little bit, but again, until we know finalized salaries and those sorts of things, that'll get adjusted at that point on behalf revenues and expenses. That's the one where, as Laney was talking earlier, we now have to show it. My first year here, I debated whether or not to put it on. I wasn't required by the state for fiscal year 15, but fiscal year 16, I was actually required to put it on there. So I did put it on there just to say, hey, we got a revenue of 11.3 million. There's an expense on the other side, so they zero each other out. Federal revenue of Medicaid is $200,000, and miscellaneous revenue just about $3,000. On the revenue line item changes, we did increase the beginning balance from what it was previously. We decreased SEEK by 2.56%, because we have a 3% predicted ADA reduction. That 3% translates into about almost $486,000 reduction in SEEK dollars for fiscal year 20. And again, we adjusted on behalf amounts proportionate to salary expenses. So as salary expenses fluctuate one way or the other, we'll adjust those on behalf as that percentage. So on the next page is the expense side of things. Really, salaries, about 26 million, employee benefits, about almost 3.5. On behalf is at 11.3 million. Professional and technological services, about $744,000. Purchase property and services, about 3 million. Other purchase services, 837. Supplies, almost 4 million. Property, which includes buses, some of our capital purchases, $745,000. Debt service and miscellaneous, we have $297,819 out of that general fund, but some of that comes from other funds where it gets transferred in and transferred back out. Contingency is at about 11.687 million, and fund transfers are at 115,000, bring us back to that total of 62.2. Expense line item changes. Salary expense, we increase it by 1.5%. And basically that's a step increase estimate, really. So we apply that. Step increases can range anywhere between 0.75% and 2%. So 1.5 is kind of that in the middle feel for it. Again, I'm going to finalize those numbers with Terry when we do the tentative budget. And that also coincides with when we do salary schedule. So if there's any changes that are made to that, we can make those adjustments in that tentative budget and give you a more reflective picture of where salaries, benefits, all those items are going to be.
And by step increase, you're talking about years of service, you get a little bump.
Correct.
Masters, you get a little bump. Rank.
Correct. I also want to make a note on that. The CERS phase in on down there, I do see it says $170,000. It's actually, I mistyped that one. It's about $270,000. It's a fat finger mistake, and I apologize. So, again, that's something where, that's only general fund, remember.
How can we make mistakes?
It happens. But that is something where, when we do this CERS phase-in, we're ever diligent about what we're presenting to the public as well on that, because we want to give them as accurate numbers as possible. So our original estimate was about $400,000, but that didn't include Fund 2s and those other sorts of items. I mean, that included Fund 2, I apologize, and food service as well. So their rates aren't included in that 270,000 number. We allocated funds to security cameras for this year. As for Central City Elementary and Greenville Elementary, it's about $50,000, $51,000 actually. And then we also budgeted $200,000 to vehicles and transportation, which are buses. So that $200,000, I'm going to budget that every year. That keeps us kind of in pace a little bit with our buses. As our bus fleet ages, there may be some years where I have to bump that up, just because, two per year is about 3 buses under what we need. We need about 5 to meet with the state's estimation of what you should be replacing annually. However, our transportation department is awesome, and so they maintain our buses for a lot longer than what the state expects them to be. So 14 years is when the bus fully depreciates. We have several that are beyond that, and we did turn some of them in for a free bus at one point. So
Maybe we got another deal like last one.
it's entirely possible.
So debt service for next year, just under 300,000 is all that will,
What may come out of general fund, but, and that may increase a little bit based on the funding that we do for the Guaranteed Energy Savings Project. However, what that does is, one of the assumptions made on the Guaranteed Energy Savings Project, there's SFCC dollars, which the state funds and pays for that. There's also the bonds that we would get for the Guaranteed Energy Savings bonds. The payments for that are supposed to be made from the energy savings that they guarantee for that. So, if they guarantee, if we have $100,000 in bond payments, there's going to be $100,000 in energy cost savings over the course of the year. Does that make sense? So that they say with all the things that they plan on doing, you're going to save this much, and that's where you're going to make your bond payment with, and that's 20 years, and that's the life of the bond as well. One of the things that I pointed out to Mr. Davis as we were sitting there is that you'll notice that on the bond page, when you look at that bond schedule, in 2 years, it drops about $200,000 annually, the expected outlay, and then after 6 years, you'll see that it drops from about $3.4 million annually in expenses to about like 2.5. So there are several bonds that are coming off in the next few years that are really going to help us out tremendously and help our cash flow, which will help us, which is why we predict, when we build the models to give to you all and say, hey, this is where we feel comfortable with this expense. We give it, like the salary expense, increasing it to 2.5% last year. We pushed those numbers out into the future and said, okay, what's that going to look like? And oh, by the way, our bond payments in 6 years are going to drop significantly, so it's not, the step increases that we're going to incur over the next 6 years, we're going to kind of get some of that back and level out after 6 years, because we know we have those bond payments coming off. Does that make sense? Okay. One of the things that we always do, and we have about 3,600 line items in our budget. We look and we see if there are line items where we've budgeted and the budget to actual is, so we may have budgeted $20,000 in one line item or something like that. We look at those and we say, okay, the last couple years, nothing has come out of that. So can we take that line item, zero that one out, and put those funds somewhere else? It may go to contingency, or it may go to some of the roofing projects when I have those conversations with Jimmy Fleming, and or bus sort of, you know, transportation items. So when I have those conversations with Jimmy and Kim, and I say, okay, you know, what's going to be the cost for this roof that we're doing at, you know, at South Middle? Okay, I've got these zero expense line item budgets in our line item that I've budgeted. You know, I may have 4 lines that total up to $100,000. Well, I can take those $100,000 and I'll shift it to the expense line that says, okay, building maintenance. So, and that really is just to show you on paper that that's there. You know, that will get shifted. This is one of these where we have to shift money from bucket to bucket to bucket, that, you know, like Lanny was talking. So I'm in that line item, I'll show you that there's $100,000 budgeted for a roofing cost. But when we go into that roofing cost, that $100,000 is going to get shifted to construction, that construction bucket, and that's what we'll pay it out of. Does that make sense? It's kind of like when some businesses have a payroll account where they'll take money and they'll fund that payroll account, it gets zeroed out, and they do that every time. Committed funds, this time we have committed funds per the fiscal year 19 working budget that we did discuss. They are on our balance sheet. It will reflect it in the January balance sheet. Moving forward, as we discussed with Lanny this evening, we're going to determine these amounts in the tentative budget. So we're going to say, okay, what does our pension expense look like? You know, our short-term pension expense. The long-term pension expense that you guys saw on, I think it was page 12, is what, if I recall correctly, is not about $9.6 million. That's long-term, so that's prorated. You know, so if someone has 5 of 27 years, well, we're going to take what it would be total and apply that 5/27 of that big bucket was what that is. But what we focus on, and when we do the committed funds, is saying, okay, one year it was $600,000. This year it looks like 400-something thousand. We may say, okay, we're going to commit $400,000 because if something happens and all those people decide, I'm going to retire right now, it could be a $400,000 hit. So we want to have that money set aside in order to make that payment and not really affect everything else on the budget. If there are major renovation items, some of the things that we're looking at this year, we have received a grant for, but we also want to make sure we have general fund dollars, like we're going to look at our entrances, those sorts of things, or if there's, you know, again, we got the roofing sorts of thing, or if there's something else that we need to do. That's where some of those funds are going to get committed. And again, that retirement commitment that I mentioned. Some of the pros that we have right now with our budget is there is a CERS phase-in. Instead of hitting us all at once, it is a phase-in. That's something we've had discussion with legislation, actually, to say, you know, we need to have some confidence in where that's going, even over the next 5 years. We do have a large contingency. However, a lot of those funds are really earmarked, and that's why we're trying to ease into things that we do, make sure that we are being very diligent with the public's funds. We want to make sure that we don't put ourselves back into a situation that we were in 4 years ago, 5 years ago, and that we can maintain and sustain over the course of time. I do expect capital outlay and building fund to cover the fiscal year 20 bond payments for the most part. However, again, as we add some of the energy savings items, we're probably gonna hit general fund. One of the cons right now is we still have declining enrollment. When I got here, it was between 0.79% and 1% decline. And then, I guess it was me, I don't know. And we dropped 3% one year and then 4%, so I mean, it's just, we're falling off, enrollment is falling off. But with that said, we are being, again, very, very responsible with the funds. So that's why we're not running around going, the sky is falling because of declining enrollment. Yes, it's not good for our district. However, we have positioned ourselves to endure those things. So, we don't have PD textbook or KTIP funding. Again, that's still not part of the budget, so that does translate to about $190,000 hit for us. So, the next page that I do want to...
Sir,
It's 270.
270.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. This work, and I also put working budget, but this is the general fund summary on here. One thing I do want you to look at, draw your attention to, is the first line where it says total budget and then salary and fringe. We're about 86.5% in terms of the budget being salary and fringe. I do think it's really more gonna hit around 85. So I think we're creeping up there to where it's somewhere I think we need to do a little hold and just kind of make sure that we're not creeping up too much too quickly to where we do position ourselves into a corner. So, but again, everything that we have done and that I've discussed in our treasurer's reports is that the monthly expenses are trending with what we have predicted. So, that's a good thing. So, again, I look at that number and I don't like the fact that we're creeping up so much, but I still feel confident in where our funds are, that we can maintain and be just fine. I won't go through the rest of that, but really the rest of this just is even further breakdown of that. Our contingency is about 18.8% at this time. One thing I do want to do is, let's go to the next page, where this is budget committee. I think I do want to kind of talk to you all about that we are going to start doing again is having a budget committee. We did have one meeting just really with the central office leadership to kind of look at these documents again and say, okay, what do we want this budget committee to look like? Where do we want it to go? What's the inputs that we're seeking? What are the things that we want to focus on? This document is something that I'd created in the past, but it's still relevant. So it kind of goes over the task and the purpose, to develop recommendations regarding the district budget and achieve the goals with we need our financial goals to coincide with the district's strategic plan. So, that strategic plan provides guardrails that we operate in. So is the budget that we're creating falling within those guidelines that we've set forth? So as we update the strategic plan, that's going to adjust how we budget. So that's where this budget committee goes back, looks at those sorts of things and says, okay, we do feel that we're operating within the confines of the strategic plan, and then when we bring the budget to you, yes, we feel confident with that. And we're going to ask for people's input. We got the superintendent, me, our academic leadership, certified staff, classified staff. I also am including Terry in that, just because she's a big part of when we do the budget, where her hands are in that constantly where I'm having her adjust things and those sorts of things as we move forward. And I'd also like to invite one of you all to be on that committee as well. And, so whoever you all choose, you can designate. But really, that's the sort of thing where we want your input as well to say, especially if we're thinking about things and you raise your hand and say, hey, hold on a second, I really don't know if this is where the board feels like we want to go. That's fine. That's where this comes into play, and we really want to use this to be a tool to help guide where we're going, but also to provide the public a little bit of a reassurance that it's not just me behind a closed door plugging in numbers and then coming to you guys and saying, here it is, vote yes. And that's something where, again, that's why I try to give you as much documentation as humanly possible to say, here's the breakdown, here's a breakdown looking at it from this direction, however, and if you come to me and you say, Eric, I really want to see it looking like, I want to see what your budget looks like when we do this or anything, I'm more than open to doing that. And that's something where this budget committee will also be a tool to let us do that.
And I see whereas, we may have Jimmy Fleming in at times and Chad and as they all have priorities for their departments, and they'll also all be tasked with are there ways you can save money? Because you're worried now that, I'm not worried, but I want to be sure now that we're in a good spot, we don't just start saying yes, yes. I mean, at the same time, we want to say yes to what's reasonable because our kids now need us to spend money on them as we can. So we just want to have a responsible approach. The more heads that are, more folks in the room, we can have those open, honest conversations. Terry she sees things that I don't see, that even Eric may not see, and so she can bring it to the table. What about this? What about that? And that's what we want. So I like this. I think it's another level of transparency. And not just that, it's another level of are we doing it right? Because folks may say, hey, what about that? Or you need to spend a little more money here. Athletics are needed. They need things right now, and how do we ease into that? And so those are the conversations we're having a lot. And let's bring more people to the table at times and just be totally open and honest about what we're thinking.
There are a lot of things where, if I could kind of just add to that and I'll stop, but when we look at things and people bring things to us, it might be $50,000, and that's a lot. That's a lot of money. But when you look at a $62 million budget, you go, oh well, that's $50,000. But you can $50,000 yourself to death, and that's what we're really trying to pull back and say, okay, what's the timeline on this improvement? Does this need to be done now? What's the safety implications on that? Even from just someone like a fence, someone getting caught on a fence, it needs to be repaired. Well,
we
got to look at that. I mean, you got to say, and really, again, the safety of the kids and the staff as well is one of our top priorities as well. So.
You said the 86%, that was getting up a little high.
Yeah.
What do other districts run?
I mean, honestly, it ranges from anywhere from 80 to 96. I mean, I've seen it where, now granted, if I pulled TVA funds out of it, the day that I walked in the door, it was 99.8%.
Yeah.
So, and that's a lot. So now with that, I still feel good about it.
Just need to pay attention.
We're just, it's one of those things where it's on the radar, we feel comfortable with it at our current staffing levels. And again, even when we can, we still scrutinize every position that comes open and says, okay, question I ask Melody every time she brings paper into me, do we really need that person?
And that's tricky because as a school level principal, I was begging for
another teacher. I was begging for another instructional aide because that makes a difference with kids. And that's one of those things you really try to balance. You don't want to sit on too much and think, boy, we need to loosen up and get another aide in each school to help these kids. At the same time, you can't just keep adding because those are the recurring costs as well. So those are the conversations we have all the time. Lanny, do you have a number in your head on salary to total percentage?
I mean, in the private sector, I kept our salaries like at 75%. But the big difference between the private sector and here is if I needed more funds, I could go out and, make more widgets to create more dollars. You can't do that here. And so that's where, you're operating within the confines of your revenues that can only, don't increase exponentially. So.
That's what happened before. We were overstaffed and we were spending money that we didn't need to be spending. And that's what got us in trouble.
And I think the recommendation in all the workshops I've attended through KSBA has been around 75, 77% is what they generally have told us.
And honestly, 3 years ago when it was that, slashed, we were at 73%. But at the same time, we want to be, you still want to be what's fair to the people that work here.
And you don't want to budget on TVA money, but if we're getting it, if we're pretty confident, and we're rethinking and looking at it again, even though we'll get more into that at a later date. But if you do have an extra $6.5 million coming in, you don't want to just put that back either when you can be using that for your kids. So that's that whole balance of, I said, well, don't budget for that. Well, if you're getting that every year for 20 or 30 years, it's tricky to budget, yes, because it can change, but there's money coming in each year that can be used for your kids then. So, that
kind of like you said, though, you can budget that money where you can move it around if you need to,
Yeah, absolutely.
Those dollars are what we would have otherwise received in property tax. And the other thing that hurts our county significantly, and it's not, is the Wendell Ford, is that's a whole lot of acreage that isn't taxed.
Yes, it is.
So I think the last time I looked, and I could be, I'm shooting off the cuff, but I think it was about 70% of our county is what's taxed. So there's 30% that is not, that being, property tax wise, being TVA and Wendell Ford. So it's a big chunk.
Yeah.
So.
And the Army base,
I'm sorry?
the Wendell Ford,
Yes, sir. And I spent many, many nights there. So, when I was in the Guard.
that's why all the vending machines used to be broken at night.
That was completely the reason. Are there any other questions on the budget?
One thing I can, one more thing to get out, there's a thing called a minimum fund balance policy that you can go through and do. And what that is the board set a policy. It says we will not spend our balance below this dollar. So like a lot of times the district will do like 3 months average expenditures. So like say for easy math, you're at $3 million a month. So you can set a policy to $9 million committed.
Put a cap on.
Okay, that one. To make sure that way you won't get too extreme, not responsible, like Eric said, get below that, because that's going to cap you to that level right there. And that'd be an easy way until you get specific items to commit for, to put $9 million in there and to bring that unassigned on down until you can start earmarking more things specifically. That's that way. This is all.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Thank you.
Yes, thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, Eric.
Okay. When we go on down to the superintendent's comments.
Hope he has not.
Babe.
I have very little, but I do have a little. Couple of things. One, you have, that's a heck of a lead-in from you. I have, you have in your stack somewhere about the KSBA conference. I think that's in February. Sherry wanted me to remind you, if you want to go to that, go through her, and we get the discount, district discount, so just let her know. You have that. Also, this, excuse me, Kim, Darren Bitten dropped this off. He recruited a speaker to come into Merle Travis Center. I think that's tomorrow night.
Yes, sir.
And a lot of leadership in the district, he's invited to go to that, so you guys are more than welcome to go to that. He wanted me to make sure I pass that on.
He is the
Got a
person.
basketball game tomorrow night.
Yeah, and I understand. He just wanted me to, to let
I
you know.
told him I would be there, but now I can't.
Mr. Davis,
Yes.
he's the one that spoke last year for soft skills at the high school for the juniors and seniors.
Okay, I missed that. I didn't realize that.
And then I heard the same presentation last week in Stanford. It is awesome.
And it's right in line with what we're trying to
I mean,
do.
it is.
So,
Where did he speak there?
We, First Southern got him for the juniors and seniors on soft skills last
Okay,
year.
okay.
But then I heard him through work last week
Oh,
on
good.
this presentation. It's really good.
Really, huh?
I'm going to tiptoe through SROs now and what we're doing because I can't mention names. So, even though it's going to be pretty obvious, but I'm going to try to work through it. You have a couple of agenda items that I'll get to in a second. The first one is not an agenda item, but we do have a new sheriff now. And so we now have another SRO. There's nothing needs to be done there because it's the position. We're just filling the position. But that person is primarily working in our elementary schools, not just elementaries. Actually, they've been a big help this week so far and last week going to the high school as well with some of our safety issues. But no agenda item needed for that, but that's what's happening there. We do have a new, this will be again on the agenda Thursday. This is the one at North Middle now. Actually, Sheriff has someone working there just to kind of help out until if and when we pass that. And that person is brand new. That's the one we're adding. And so that's total cost of the district right now. We're not, again, at your pleasure Thursday night. And they'll provide the training, they'll provide the oversight, they'll provide the car. But that's something we've talked about in a while. I don't know if we committed funds for that or not. I think we did.
We have money budgeted.
I'll tell you, this week and last week, I'm very glad we have done that. So that's an agenda item, is to approve that. Also, our Muhlenberg County Police Department at West Campus, assuming that we vote this way Thursday night, that department, which is one position, will be dissolved, and that will go under the fiscal court, essentially go under the Sheriff's Department. And what we get out of that is we will get our car back, and the Sheriff's Department will provide a car. So nothing will change as far as the kids see and that position sees, but we're going to come out ahead, and then we're going to get a vehicle back, plus the training and the oversight, that will go through the Sheriff's Department, which they're more capable of doing that than Matt or someone here at the board trying to oversee that. And then hopefully down the road, maybe get some more of the cost back on that as well. But those are the two things, those two items. Eric, you can jump in on this, on anything in particular, but those will require board action. That last one I talked about is strictly a plus to the district. I see zero downside to that. And we get a vehicle back that we're needing, that we can use. We'll have to decide how to use that, but we'll be getting that back. And then the other one is just a brand new position, and that person will be placed at North Middle. Actually have a person there now, thanks to the sheriff for that. They've already put somebody in there, so we would not be without someone, because that's where our sheriff was. How have I done, Sherry? I have waded through this without mentioning any names. I will say, just thanks to our SROs, the last week, they're worth their weight in gold. They always are, but even more so now. I mean, they are stepping up. They're everywhere. They're just very, very important. So those are a couple of items Thursday that I've mentioned there, and Eric can maybe explain a little bit better, but those two items will it'll be on the agenda Thursday, and if that passes, then we'll move forward and the fiscal court will take over and do, make a move or two, but they're waiting on us.
On the short of that, number one is the new position, which has already been budgeted. Number two is the position, no expenses will change in terms of that, and we're gaining the use of a vehicle, so it's actually a plus for us. I did work with the county attorney on the contract language. It's very similar to one of the previous ones that we have done. So there really isn't anything glaring that says, oh, wow, we need to, be cognizant of that. It's just, they're quite straightforward.
I encourage you to be here by 5 o'clock, maybe a little before 5 Thursday night if you can. It's Board Recognition Month, so much appreciation with you folks, and we'll be talking more about that Thursday. If you can come a little early for finger foods and all, and kind of just hang out with us Thursday downstairs, that would be great. Craig Thomas will be here Thursday during my report to talk about the Bremen project and where we are. Hopefully during the February meeting, we'll actually be ready finally to vote to move forward. And so we're not quite there yet, but I thought if he could come this time and tell you where we are, 5 or 10 minutes, here's what's going on, in case you're getting any. I'm sure Ms. Rager is getting some questions about that. I'm excited. We're finally almost to that point. Just a couple other items we may want to consider down the road, changing our public participation policy. We've talked about that, about kind of reworking that just a little bit. We'll get some samples to you and make that a little easier, but at the same time, try to be on topic and then something with, so we'll get some copies to you, some things to consider, but that's something we talked about, so that won't be on anything Thursday, but that's coming. And then what will be on the agenda Thursday is for dates and locations to be set, and you need to just consider, because we can come back here every time if you want, or we can go through schools. And I
was just asking, isn't that pretty much a long day and a pressure on the school? I know they welcome us, I understand all that, but they'll do whatever asked of them, but don't you think they have to have few people staying extra?
There's things. Sherry's got, it's a lot extra on Sherry as well, and I don't want to throw Sherry in the bus because she never complains, but I will say, this is totally what you want to do.
Moving all the stuff, carrying around and
She does that, and
Chad has to move all the equipment. What do you think?
it's something, well, think about, just be, we're not going to vote on it tonight or anything, but be thinking about that, and we can easily stay here, or if you want to go to schools, then we're fine with that. It's totally at the board's pleasure, so just something to be considering, and I think we've gone through, we've got the dates set up where we're not going to run into spring break, fall break, Christmas, hopefully we got those set up right, and we'll just add work sessions as needed, which will pretty much be when we're hitting salary, when we're hitting our other budgets. Otherwise, we typically don't need them, but we can always call one.
Yes.
So that's kind of where we are with that, and I just kind of want to give you, just be thinking about those things just a little bit, and that's my comments.
Thank you very much. All right, well, we can need a motion for adjournment.
Second.
Motion by Mr. Johar, second by Mr. Bowers. All in favor of adjourning, say aye. Aye. Meeting's adjourned.